Marta, a woman in her early 50s, had worked as a cleaner at the city's central hospital for more than 2 decades. She was known for being discreet and efficient, always keeping areas spotless while avoiding attention. However, in recent weeks, something in the behavior of a young patient, João, just 12 years old, began to awaken his curiosity. Hospitalized for about a month, João was different from the other patients Marta had met. He was always alone, rarely received visitors, and had a distant and enigmatic expression that intrigued Marta. As she cleaned his room every morning, Marta glanced at him. João spent long periods looking out the window, even when there was nothing interesting outside. He rarely spoke to the nurses or doctors, and when he did, his answers were short, almost evasive. There was something in the boy's eyes, something that Marta couldn't define. She wasn't the type to get involved in her patients' lives, but João's behavior seemed to scream for attention, even though he tried hard to remain distant. During one of these mornings, Marta was cleaning the floor in the hallway when she saw João leave the room and walk slowly towards the forbidden wing of the hospital, where only doctors were allowed to enter. He stopped abruptly when he realized he was being watched and, without saying a word, returned to his room with hurried steps. Marta felt a chill down her spine, but chose to ignore the situation. However, the scene repeated itself in the following days. João always seemed to be on the verge of something important, but backed off at the last moment. As the days went by, the cleaning lady began to feel that there was something deeper going on. John never mentioned his parents, and visitor records showed that no one came to visit him. This was unusual, especially for a child that age. Marta also noticed that the treatment he received seemed more complex than usual, involving doctors from different specialties. She didn't know the details, but the amount of tests and exams that João underwent daily did not seem normal for a child with a common illness. The feeling that something was wrong began to grow inside Marta. She, who had always been practical and rational, was now obsessed with the idea that João was hiding something. And it wasn't just his health. There was something in the boy's eyes that made her think he knew more than he let on. She found herself thinking about the boy at night, remembering every gesture, every look. Marta had never felt this curiosity before, and it bothered her. Why did João affect her so much? Even so, Marta tried to convince herself that she was exaggerating. After all, she was just a cleaning lady with no involvement in medical care. But, at the same time, I felt like I was witnessing something bigger than I imagined. Something that could change everything. She just needed a clue, a detail, to confirm her suspicions. João was hiding something, and Marta was determined to find out what it was. In the days that followed, Marta continued her usual routine, but now paying even more attention to João's behavior. When she entered his room to clean, she moved cautiously, trying to notice any unusual details. João rarely interacted with her, but Marta noticed the way he watched her, as if he were waiting for something. His gaze was heavy, and the tension in the air was undeniable. Even without exchanging words, they both knew they were aware of each other's presence. One morning, while sweeping the floor, Marta noticed something that made her stop immediately. In the corner of the room, next to the bed, there was a small notebook barely hidden under João's pillow. She watched as he slept soundly, probably under the influence of medication. Curiosity got the best of her, but Marta knew she couldn't just take the notebook. However, the discovery of that object fueled his suspicions. What would a child like João write that was so secret that he would hide his notebook? From that day on, Marta began to notice other details. João, for example, always carried a small pendant around his neck, something that seemed much older and more valuable than anything else he had. She wondered if that object could be linked in some way to the mystery surrounding the boy. João never mentioned the pendant, but he held it often, especially when he was alone looking out the window. It was as if the object was a connecting point between him and something larger, something he kept hidden. The days passed and Marta found herself increasingly involved in João's mystery. His behavior became stranger every day. He spoke to the nurses and doctors only what was essential, but Marta noticed that sometimes he whispered to himself, as if he were talking to someone who wasn't there. Could it be a side effect of the medications? Or perhaps he was dealing with something emotionally intense that caused him to act this way. Marta didn't know, but she was determined to find out. One afternoon, while walking through the hospital corridors, Marta heard a conversation between two doctors that left her even more intrigued. One of them mentioned Joao's name, and the serious expression on their faces indicated that something out of the ordinary was happening to the boy. "He shouldn't know that," said one of the doctors, lowering his voice. "But it looks like he already knows." Marta walked away before she was seen, but those words kept echoing in her mind. Know what? What could Joao know that was worrying even the doctors? Marta, until then a passive observer, realized that she was increasingly involved in the mystery. He could no longer ignore what was happening around him. Joao was a child who carried a burden much greater than she could imagine. But what was this burden? She needed more information. He needed an opportunity to get closer to Joao and find out what he knew. And this opportunity would soon arise unexpectedly. With more and more questions in mind, Marta began to mentally search the conversations she had heard over the days. She knew the secret was there, between the lines of the strange behaviors and whispered conversations. Joao was not just an ordinary patient. Something extraordinary surrounded that boy, and Marta was about to discover what it was. One afternoon, while Marta was carrying out her daily cleaning routine in Joao's room, something different happened. For the first time, the boy observed her directly, without looking away or trying to avoid interaction. He seemed to be waiting for that moment. There was something in his eyes, an unusual depth for someone so young, that made Marta hesitate for a moment. She felt that Joao was about to say something important, something that would completely change the course of her suspicions. "You know, don't you?" asked Joao, suddenly breaking the silence. Marta was surprised by the question and the serious tone in her voice. It was as if he was testing her, checking to see if she really realized what was happening. Not knowing how to respond, Marta stopped cleaning and looked at him. "Know what?" she asked, trying to keep her voice steady, but still showing the discomfort she felt at that moment. Joao gave a slight smile, as if he knew that Marta was trying hard to understand. "You watch me all the time. I know you realize something is wrong here." The way he spoke, with so much confidence, made Marta feel a shiver down her spine. How did that boy know so much about what was going on around him? How was he able to see beyond what any other child his age could? Marta, who had always been practical and skeptical, felt like she was facing something inexplicable. "I just worry about you," replied Marta, trying to divert the subject, but Joao continued, now with his eyes fixed on hers. "They think I'm just a kid, but I know more than they know. I know what's going on here, and I know you're curious too." Marta didn't know what to say. How could John be aware of all this? That conversation, which she would never have imagined having with a 12-year-old boy, now placed her at a critical point, confronting what she knew or walking away from it. Marta decided at that moment that she could no longer walk away. "What do you know, Joao?" he asked, now with a firmer voice, feeling that he was finally close to a revelation. The boy looked at the window, the same gesture he made whenever he was lost in deep thought. "They brought me here because of something I can do, something they don't yet understand." He turned to Marta again. "I'm not like the others, and they want to find out why." That answer only brought more questions to Marta's mind. "Something you can do? What do you mean by that?" The cleaning lady, now too involved to back down, approached Joao's bed, waiting for him to reveal more details. "You'll find out soon enough," he replied cryptically. "But for now, you're the only one who can help me." John's words resonated within Marta like a call. Without knowing exactly what she was getting into, she realized that there was something bigger going on, and that she was now part of it. After that enigmatic conversation with Joao, Marta spent the rest of the day with increasing restlessness. The boy's words echoed in her mind, and no matter how much she tried to concentrate on her tasks, she couldn't shake the feeling that something extraordinary was happening. What did John mean by something he could do? And why did he believe that she, a simple cleaning lady, could help him? Marta had always been skeptical, down to earth, but the boy's confident stance had shaken her deeply. In the following days, Marta noticed that the relationship between her and João had changed. The boy was now watching her differently, as if he knew she was more involved than before. Even without exchanging many words, there was a tension in the air whenever she entered the room. He knew she was curious, and Marta felt that João was just waiting for the right moment to reveal more. Little by little, the cleaning lady began to notice that his behavior towards doctors and nurses had also changed. João seemed less evasive, but maintained a calculated distance. Marta's curiosity reached its peak one morning when she found João sitting on the bed, holding the small pendant he always wore around his neck. He stared at the object, his lips moving silently, as if he were reciting something. Marta hesitated for a moment at the door, but then, without her needing to ask, João spoke. "This pendant belonged to my grandmother. She said it had a special power. A power that only someone in our family can control." The revelation was sudden, but the calm with which he spoke left her even more intrigued. Marta approached slowly, not wanting to scare the boy. "What kind of power, João?" he asked, trying to keep his voice calm, but knowing that he was about to hear something that would change everything. João looked at her and, with a serious expression, replied, "I can see things that other people don't see, and when I touch this pendant, it gets stronger. That's why they brought me here, to try to understand what I can do." His words seemed implausible, but the certainty with which he spoke was undeniable. Marta felt a mixture of disbelief and fascination. How could that boy have such supernatural ability? "Do you see things?" he repeated, his voice weak. John nodded. "Yes, but not like ghosts or anything. I see connections. Between people, between objects. I can feel what's happening, even if it's not visible to others." The cleaning lady took a step back, absorbing what she had just heard. That was impossible, but at the same time, it made sense considering João's unusual behavior and the doctor's interest in his case. "Aren't you lying?" asked Marta, not wanting to offend him, but still in disbelief. João shook his head with a sad smile. "I don't need to lie, Marta. I see what's happening to you too. I can see that you're scared, but I can also see that you want to help." The revelation made Marta freeze. How could he know that? She had never shared these feelings with anyone. I just want to understand, João. Why did they bring you here, really?" he asked, already knowing that the answer would be more complex than he expected. João took a deep breath and looked at the pendant again. "They want to use what I can do. They think it's a power that can be controlled. But it's not like that. I don't control it. And if they keep trying, it will end badly for all of us." Marta felt a shiver. The secret that João carried was much more dangerous than she imagined. Now, she not only needed to understand, but also protect the boy from something he himself could barely explain. After João's revelation, Marta spent the following days in a state of constant alert. She didn't know what to do with the information the boy had given her. The story of a pendant with powers and the ability to see connections between people seemed like fiction. But the boy's behavior and the certainty in his words made everything very real. Furthermore, the fact that João mentioned that his presence at the hospital was related to this power only increased Marta's concerns. What did those doctors really want? Throughout the week, Marta noticed that the doctors responsible for João were intensifying the examinations and tests. More equipment was brought into the room, and the doctors spent more and more time inside, always leaving with expressions of concern or frustration. This only confirmed John's words. They were trying to understand his power, perhaps even control it. Marta feared what might happen if they succeeded. What if they did something that hurt the boy? One afternoon, while cleaning the hallway near the doctor's break room, Marta overheard a conversation that made her blood run cold. Two doctors were discussing John's case. One of them seemed hesitant, while the other spoke with determination. "We need to go deeper," said one of the doctors. "He is resisting, but not for long. This kind of ability needs to be understood, and we cannot waste this opportunity." The other doctor seemed less comfortable with the idea. "But he's just a boy. What if this is dangerous for him?" Marta knew she shouldn't be listening, but those words only confirmed her suspicions. The doctors were willing to force João to cooperate, even if it put him at risk. She could no longer ignore what was happening. Now, it was clear that John's well-being was being put on the back burner, and all because of this power he possessed. Marta knew she needed to do something. But what? She was just a cleaning lady, with no influence on the hospital's decisions. That night, Marta couldn't sleep. She lay in bed, thinking about the options she had. He could try to confront the doctors, but he knew they wouldn't listen. She could go to the hospital administration, but who would believe her? The only thing clear was that she couldn't leave João alone in this situation. The boy trusted her, and now she felt a responsibility to protect him. But how can she do this without putting herself or him in even more danger? The next morning, Marta decided that she needed to talk to João again. He was the only person who could tell her what to do. If he really had that power, maybe he could help her find a way out. When he entered his room, however, he found the boy weaker than ever. João was pale and exhausted, as if the tests of the last few days were draining his energy. "They're getting closer," he whispered, when he saw Marta enter. "I won't hold out much longer." Marta's heart sank when she saw the boy's condition. She approached and, with a trembling voice, asked, "What can I do to help you, João? Tell me." João, with a tired look, held the pendant around his neck and said, "They can't find out everything about this. If they do, it will be dangerous for everyone." Marta didn't know what that meant, but she understood that she needed to act quickly. João's health and life were at risk, and now, more than ever, she needed to be quick and smart. After hearing João's desperate words, Marta knew she needed to act. The boy was weakened and under constant surveillance by doctors. Whatever they were doing, it was harming their health and possibly triggering something even they didn't fully understand. Marta, with a heavy heart, realized she couldn't wait any longer. John was in danger, and she was the only person who knew enough to intervene. His first idea was simple: get João out of the hospital. However, I knew this would be almost impossible. The hospital was always monitored, and any attempt to remove a patient without authorization would be quickly discovered. She also couldn't count on anyone's help. Who would believe that a 12-year-old boy had a supernatural power that doctors wanted to explore? Marta knew she was alone on this mission, but that wouldn't stop her. While thinking about a plan, Marta began to observe more closely the routine of the doctors and nurses who took care of João. She needed to find a gap, a moment when the boy could be left alone, away from the tests and machines. After days of observation, she noticed that, every night, there was a short break between the nurses' shift changes, where João's room was unoccupied for a few minutes. It was a short window of time, but enough to do something. Marta decided that that night she would act. She would enter João's room during the break and at least try to take the pendant out of his hands. If that object was the key to what the doctors were looking for, perhaps she could hide it or take it out of the hospital without being noticed. It was a risky idea, but it was the only option that made sense. If he could hide the pendant, maybe he could buy time to protect the boy somehow. That night, Marta waited until the hospital was calmer. The silence of the corridors, only interrupted by the sound of nurses' footsteps and the beeping of machines, made her even more nervous. She knew she only had a few minutes to act, so, with her heart racing, she discreetly entered João's room. The boy was sleeping, exhausted from the endless tests, but the pendant still dangled from his neck, shining faintly in the dim light of the room. Marta approached carefully, trying not to wake the boy. With trembling hands, she took the pendant and, in one quick movement, removed it from João's neck. As soon as she did, something strange happened. The environment seemed to change. The air grew heavier, and for a brief moment, Marta felt a strange pressure around her, as if the entire hospital had realized what she had done. Without time to think, she hid the pendant in her uniform pocket and left the room, breathing deeply as she tried to ignore the feeling that she was being watched. Now, with the pendant in her hands, Marta knew that things would get even more complicated. She had done the first part of her plan, but now she needed to figure out what to do with the object. More than that, he needed to understand if this really was the key to protecting João, or if he was just starting to get involved in something much bigger and more dangerous than he had ever imagined. After taking off João's pendant, Marta returned to her routine with a feeling of constant nervousness. Every step she took through the hospital corridors felt heavier, as if everyone's eyes were on her. The pendant, now hidden in his pocket, gave off a deceptive lightness. Even without knowing exactly what she had done, Marta knew she had messed with something powerful and dangerous. His instinct told him that, somehow, the doctors would notice the object's absence, and that the consequences would be serious. That morning, Marta noticed an immediate change in Joao's behavior. The boy seemed more restless than usual. He looked around the room, as if he knew something was missing, but without mentioning the pendant directly. When Marta came in to clean, he watched her carefully, his eyes filled with a mix of hope and distrust. "You caught it, didn't you?" he asked, in a tone that didn't sound like an accusation, but like an observation. Marta hesitated but nodded. "I needed to do something, John. You said this was dangerous." Joao did not react with surprise, but with resignation. "Now they'll realize," he said, his voice soft. "What I can do is tied to this pendant." And they were close to figuring out how it all works. The explanation, however vague it was, made Marta even more apprehensive. She had stopped the doctors from continuing their experiments on Joao. But at what cost? If the pendant was truly the key to the boy's power, its absence could make the situation worse. "You did right," he continued. "But we need to be quick. They won't give up that easily." Marta knew that Joao was right. Doctors would soon notice that something was different and begin investigating. It didn't take long for this to happen. At the end of that day, Marta began to notice agitation among the doctors taking care of Joao. They came in and out of the room more frequently, checking the equipment and talking in whispers. Although she couldn't hear everything, she caught snippets of conversations that worried her. "The signals are weaker. Something is interfering," said one of the doctors. The disappearance of the pendant had, in fact, caused an impact. That night, Marta lay awake thinking about what she should do next. She knew she couldn't just return the pendant, but she also couldn't let Joao's situation get worse. The boy was already visibly weaker since she had removed the object, and it tormented her. The only solution that seemed possible was to find a way to hide the pendant permanently, out of the doctor's reach, but without harming Joao. The problem was how to do this without arousing further suspicion. The next day, Marta decided that she needed to talk to Joao once again. She hoped he could guide her on the next step. When he entered his room, the boy was lying down, pale but conscious. "I know what you're thinking," he said, before Marta could say anything. "You think hiding the pendant will protect me, but it won't. They'll keep testing me until they understand what I am, with or without it." Marta felt a lump in her throat. "So what should we do?" she asked, desperate for a solution. Joao looked directly at Marta, his eyes reflecting a wisdom unusual for his age. "We need to get away from here," he said, with a seriousness that made Marta hesitate. To escape? How could she get Joao out of a hospital so well guarded, and with so many doctors involved in his case? The idea seemed impossible, but at the same time, Joao was right. They wouldn't stop until they got what they wanted. Now, the cleaning lady was faced with an even more dangerous decision. Follow the risky escape plan, or try to find another way to protect the boy. The idea of taking Joao out of the hospital was scary for Marta. She had never done anything like this, and the mere thought of defying hospital security made her nervous. However, as he cleaned the hallways, Joao's voice echoed in his mind. "We need to escape." He was right, but how to accomplish something so audacious? The security, the doctors, and the surveillance cameras made everything seem impossible. But even so, Marta knew that if she stayed still, Joao's situation would only get worse. With the pendant still hidden in her pocket, Marta began to devise a plan. She needed help, but she knew she couldn't trust anyone inside the hospital. He thought about external people, perhaps some trusted contact, but who would help a simple cleaning lady take a child out of a hospital without attracting attention? As she pondered, Marta remembered an old employee, Julio, who worked in the hospital parking lot. He was always discreet and never asked unnecessary questions. If there was anyone who could help her without raising suspicion, it would be him. Marta decided that her best chance was to involve Julio in the plan. On one of her breaks, she went to the parking lot and found the man, who was distracted adjusting one of the cars. "Julio," she called, trying to sound casual but not hiding her urgency. He looked at her with an expression of curiosity. "I need a favor, and I mean it." Without going into too many details, Marta explained that she needed to get a child out of the hospital without the doctors noticing. Julio was silent for a moment, clearly surprised by the boldness of the request. "This is dangerous, Marta," he said. "Are you sure what you're doing?" She knew the answer wasn't simple. No, she wasn't sure of anything. But John's desperation and certainty that something dark was happening were reasons enough to try. "I have no other choice," she replied firmly. "This boy, he's in danger, and if he stays here, I don't know what will happen to him." Julio, despite his initial hesitation, seemed to understand the gravity of the situation. "Okay," he said, sighing. "I'll help, but we have to be quick and careful." With Julio's help guaranteed, Marta began to adjust the details of the plan. They decided that the best time to act would be during the night shift change, when movement was at its lowest and doctors were most distracted. Julio would be able to park one of the cars closer to one of the side exits, which are less monitored. Everything would have to be quick, with no room for error. Marta knew that any mistake could be costly, not only for João, but also for her and Julio. That night, Marta entered João's room with the feeling that this would be the decisive moment. "Everything is ready," she said in a low voice, so as not to be heard by the nurses in the hallway. João, although still weak, seemed to be encouraged when he heard Marta's words. "Are we going to make it?" he asked, and Marta, although she wasn't sure, replied confidently, "Yes, we will." There was no more time for doubts. The plan was underway, and now everything depended on how the next few minutes would go. Marta helped João get out of bed, covering him with a large coat that she had brought, trying to disguise her patient appearance as much as possible. They left the room, and Marta guided the boy through the corridors, keeping her gaze steady and trying not to attract attention. Each step seemed like a risk, but they finally reached the side exit where Julio was waiting for them with the car. "Come in quickly," he said, looking around, alert for any sign of movement. Marta and João got into the car, and as they drove away from the hospital, she felt a wave of relief. They had managed to get out, but the danger was far from over. Now they were on the run, and Marta knew it wouldn't be easy to keep João safe for long. Julio's car sped through the dark streets of the city, and Marta felt her heart pounding in her chest. She looked at João beside her, who looked exhausted but relieved to be out of the hospital. The escape had been a success, but the danger was not yet behind them. Marta knew that the doctors would notice João's absence very soon, and then the real hunt would begin. They wouldn't let the boy get away so easily, not after everything they had already invested in understanding his abilities. As they drove, Julio asked in a low voice, "What now? Where are we going to take him?" Marta didn't have a ready answer. He had no plan beyond escape, and now he found himself without clear options. "I don't know. We need a safe place, at least for a while," he said, trying to remain calm. She knew she couldn't go home or keep João anywhere where he could be easily tracked. "Maybe there is somewhere outside the city," suggested Julio, clearly nervous about the situation. He also realized the size of the risk they were taking. Meanwhile, John, although tired, was alert. He looked out the window, as if he was taking in something beyond what others could see. "They'll find us if we stay in one place too long," said the boy with frightening certainty. Marta turned to him, surprised. "How do you know that?" João sighed and held the pendant that Marta had returned to him shortly after escaping. "I can feel when they are close. It's as if connections between people tighten when they are looking for something or someone." John's words were a reminder that what they were facing went far beyond just doctors. There was something supernatural at play, something Marta was barely beginning to understand. John's power was real, and the people hunting him knew it too. Now the challenge was to keep the boy out of their reach. Marta knew she couldn't trust anyone other than Julio and, perhaps, João's own instinct. Every minute, the risk increased, and she felt the weight of responsibility growing on her shoulders. After driving for a while, Julio suggested that they could temporarily hide in an abandoned house he knew, on the outskirts of town. "It's not an ideal place, but no one will think to look for you there," he said, turning the car onto a country road. Marta knew it was a temporary solution, but she had no choice. They needed time to think of a more elaborate plan. "Let's go there for now," she said, finally agreeing. As the car drove down the deserted road, John closed his eyes and murmured, "They're closer than you think." Marta felt a chill. The chase hadn't stopped, and now it was a matter of time before they were found. The question was, how would they protect themselves when that happened? She needed answers, and fast. Arriving at the abandoned house, Julio helped them settle in, but the tension in the air was palpable. Marta knew that the place wouldn't be safe for long, but she hoped it would be enough to think of a new way out. Meanwhile, João sat on the floor, with the pendant in his hands, focused on something that Marta couldn't understand. He seemed to be trying to use his power in some way, but he didn't explain what he was doing. "I'll give us some time," he said, without opening his eyes. The night advanced slowly in the abandoned house, and Marta could barely rest. Every little noise made her jump in fright, fearing they would be discovered. Julius, who had promised to return in the morning with more supplies, left them alone, and the solitude of the place increased the feeling of imminent danger. Marta looked at João, who remained concentrated, holding the pendant as if it were his only protection. What could he be doing with that? And would it really work? The heavy silence was suddenly broken by a distant sound, coming from the road. Marta looked out the window and saw headlights approaching. His heart raced. "They are here," said João, his voice calm but full of certainty. Marta ran to him, despair growing inside her. "What are we going to do, João? How can we run away again?" She knew that running away again would be nearly impossible. They were surrounded, and now they would need to face the situation. João slowly opened his eyes and looked at Marta with a calm, although tired, expression. "I can slow them down, but you need to help me," he said. Marta was confused. How could such a young boy face them alone? But she had no choice. She trusted João, and if he said there was a chance, she would take it. "What do I need to do?" he asked, his voice shaking. João extended the pendant to her. "Hold it, and trust me." As Marta held the pendant, a strange sensation took over her body, as if a current of energy passed through her. She felt that something invisible was happening, something powerful that she couldn't see, but that João controlled. The boy closed his eyes again and began to murmur words that Marta couldn't understand. She realized that, somehow, he was using the pendant to manipulate the connections he had mentioned so much. The people who were approaching began to slow down, as if something was stopping them from moving forward. For a few minutes, the plan worked. The approaching headlights stopped in the middle of the road, as if the pursuers were confused, lost in an invisible maze. Marta could hardly believe what was happening. John really had power, and he was using it to protect them. But the victory was brief. Soon, the headlights began to move again, and this time with more speed. "They are overcoming my barrier," said João, in an exhausted voice. "I can't hold them much longer." Marta felt despair take over again. They were stuck, and João had already done everything he could. But at the same time, something inside her lit up. Maybe it was the pendant, or maybe it was the courage she barely knew she had. "Then we will fight," she said firmly. João looked at her, surprised. "You can't face them, Marta. Not alone." But the cleaning lady knew she was no longer alone. João was with her, and the power he possessed, along with his determination, could be enough to face whatever came. The headlights finally stopped in front of the house. Marta took a deep breath, holding the pendant tightly, while João prepared himself for what was to come. They knew that confrontation was inevitable, but they also knew that, together, they had a chance. The car doors opened, and the first footsteps began to echo on the dirt floor. The confrontation was about to happen, but Marta and João, now linked by something much bigger than them, were ready to face whatever came.